The air in the emergency room of Metropolitan General was a thick soup of controlled panic, smelling of antiseptic iron-rich blood, and the faint, sour tang of human fear. It was a symphony of discordant sounds, the rhythmic, insistent beeping of a telemetry monitor, the sharp hiss of an oxygen tank being opened, the wet, ragged cough of a man in Bay 3, and the ever-present, low murmur of voices speaking in the clipped technical shorthand of medicine. For most, it was an environment of overwhelming chaos, a maelstrom of human suffering that battered the senses and frayed the nerves. For Nurse Elara Vance, it was Tuesday. She moved through the bedlam, not with the frantic energy of her younger colleagues, but with a serene, almost unnerving economy of motion. Every step was deliberate, every action precise, as if she were mentally charting the most efficient path through a minefield. Her posture was a study in quiet discipline, spine straight, shoulders back, a stark contrast to the weary slump of the residents on their 24th hour. She was of average height, with dark hair pulled back into a severe, functional bun that allowed no stray strands to distract her. Her face, often set in a neutral, observant expression, was framed by eyes the color of a stormy sea, deep gray and missing nothing. They were the eyes of a person who had seen far too much and had learned to process the world in silent, analytical sweeps. New interns often mistook her stillness for slowness, her quietude for a lack of confidence. They learned, usually within their first code blue, that they were catastrophically wrong. Elara Vance did not hurry. She simply arrived at the critical point with exactly what was needed, a fraction of a second before anyone else realized it was necessary. She was working on a patient in Trauma Bay 1, a construction worker who had fallen 3 stories onto a pile of rebar. The scene was gruesome, a canvas of crimson and exposed tissue. While the attending physician barked orders, Elara was already a step ahead, her hands moving with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and chilling. She applied a tourniquet high on the man's mangled thigh, her fingers finding the femoral artery by feel alone, cinching the strap with a single powerful pull that stemmed the arterial spray. She anticipated the doctor's need for a chest tube, having a thoracotomy tray opened and ready before the words left his mouth. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and calm, a steady current beneath the crashing waves of the emergency. Pressure is 80/40 and dropping. Starting a second, large-bore IV. Let's get him typed and cross-matched for 4 units of O negative. There was no question in her tone, only a statement of clear, tactical necessity. A long, silver-white scar snaked its way up her right forearm, disappearing under the sleeve of her blue scrubs. It was a puckered, ugly thing, a map of some past violence. A nosy resident had asked about it once during a rare moment of downtime. Elara had glanced down at it, her expression unreadable, and replied with a soft, dismissive murmur, "A climbing accident." The resident, feeling the sudden chill in the air, had never asked again. But it was not the scar of a fall. It was the kind of mark left by hot, fast-moving metal, a story written in shredded flesh and cauterized nerve endings. Her hands, though gentle as they cleaned a child's scraped knee, bore their own secrets. The palms were tough, and across the knuckles of her right hand was a faint, pale line of scar tissue. The kind a person got from hitting something, or someone, very hard, a long time ago. Later that shift, the automatic doors hissed open to admit 2 police officers flanking a handcuffed man bleeding from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. He was loud and belligerent, spitting curses at the cops. They maneuvered him onto a gurney, and in the process, one of the officer's sidearms, a Glock 19, was jostled from its holster and clattered onto the edge of the mattress, perilously close to the patient. The younger officer lunged for it, but Elara was closer. Her hand shot out, not in a grab, but in a smooth, practiced motion. Her fingers wrapped around the grip, her index finger straight and clear of the trigger guard. In a single fluid movement, she pressed the magazine release, letting the mag drop into her other hand, and racked the slide to eject the chambered round, catching the gleaming brass cartridge in midair. She placed the cleared weapon, the magazine, and the loose round on the counter in 3 distinct safe piles. The entire action took less than 2 seconds. The senior police officer, a veteran with 20 years on the force, just stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. You know your way around one of those?" he stammered. Elara simply picked up a pair of trauma shears and began cutting away the patient's blood-soaked shirt. "My father was a hunter," she said, her voice betraying nothing, and the explanation hung in the air, feeling both plausible and profoundly inadequate. The day wore on, a relentless tide of human misery. But as the afternoon waned, a different kind of presence entered the ER, one that clashed with the organized chaos. Mr. Alistair Finch, the hospital administrator, strode through the doors as if he were parting the Red Sea. He was a man poured into a suit that cost more than a nurse's monthly salary, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of patrician distaste. He abhorred the emergency department, viewing it as a messy, unprofitable necessity, a stain on the otherwise pristine image of his institution. He was followed by an elderly man in a tweed jacket, Mr. Harrington, a potential benefactor whom Finch was wooing for a donation to a new, far more lucrative cardiology wing. Finch's voice was a smooth, oily baritone as he pointed out pieces of equipment, carefully steering his guest away from the more visceral realities of the floor. Suddenly, the radio on the wall crackled to life with a chilling announcement. Mass casualty incident. Multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate. 15+ victims. Inbound now. The low hum of the ER instantly escalated into a high-pitched thrum of activity. Doctors and nurses moved with renewed urgency, preparing for the deluge. Finch's face tightened with annoyance. This was precisely the kind of unscripted bloody mess he had hoped to avoid. His tour was ruined. He tried to guide Harrington toward the exit, but it was too late. The first wave of paramedics burst through the doors, their gurneys carrying the broken and bleeding. A small child, no older than 6, was wheeled into Trauma Bay 1. Her face was pale as milk, a deep laceration across her forehead weeping blood. One leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Her breathing was shallow, thready. Elara was on her instantly, her focus narrowing to the tiny, fragile life in front of her. She cut away the girl's clothes, her movements swift and sure, calling out vitals to the trauma surgeon who had just arrived. No breath sounds on the left side. Tracheal deviation to the right. Looks like a tension pneumothorax. She reached for a large bore needle for a decompression, her entire world shrinking to a single critical task. It was at that moment that Finch, trying to salvage his presentation, stepped into the bay. He wanted to show Harrington the advanced monitoring systems, the gleaming chrome and blinking lights. He saw Elara's back, her blue scrubs obscuring the view. "Excuse me, nurse, if you could just step aside for a moment," he said, his voice laced with impatience. Elara didn't move, her hands steady as she prepared to insert the needle into the child's chest. Her universe contained only the patient, the needle, and the ticking clock of mortality. "I need to do this now," she stated, not looking back. Finch's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He was not accustomed to being ignored, especially not by a mere nurse, and certainly not in front of a man he was trying to impress. His voice grew sharp, condescending. "Sweetheart, I am the administrator of this hospital, and I gave you a directive. Move, now." He reached out his manicured hand, intending to physically shove her out of the way. He never made contact. With a speed that seemed to defy physics, Elara's left hand came up, intercepting his wrist in a grip of shocking strength. She still did not turn her head, her eyes fixed on the child's chest. Her voice was no longer soft, it was as cold and hard as chipped flint. "You will not touch me, and you will not interfere with patient care. Get out." The words were spoken just above a whisper, yet they carried the weight of an iron command. Finch froze, stunned by the steel in her grip and the absolute authority in her voice. Harrington looked on, his expression one of deep discomfort. Humiliated and furious, Finch wrenched his hand away and stormed out of the trauma bay, his face a thundercloud of promised retribution. The next morning, at 6 o'clock sharp, Elara was summoned to Mr. Finch's office. It was a world away from the ER, a hushed sanctuary of polished mahogany, leather-bound books that had never been read, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Finch sat behind his enormous desk, like a king on his throne, his face a smug mask of triumph. He did not invite her to sit. He reveled in her standing before him in her simple scrubs, a symbol of the menial labor he so despised. "Miss Vance," he began, savoring the formal dismissal of her professional title. "Your conduct yesterday was not only unprofessional, it was dangerously insubordinate. You physically assaulted me and verbally abused me in front of a distinguished hospital benefactor, Mr. Harrington, who has since expressed serious reservations about his philanthropic commitments. He paused, letting the weight of his accusations settle in the silent room. Your employment at Metropolitan General is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises, you will collect your personal belongings from your locker, and you will leave. Is that understood? Elara met his gaze without flinching. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear, only a profound and weary resignation, as if she were observing a predictable, unpleasant natural phenomenon like mold growing on old bread. She had seen men like Finch before, in different uniforms, in different countries. Small men who inflated their own importance by diminishing others. Arguing with him would be like arguing with the rain. She gave a single, curt nod. Understood. Her lack of a reaction seemed to enrage him more than any outburst could have. He wanted her to beg, to cry, to plead. Her quiet dignity was an affront to his power. He sneered and pressed a button on his intercom. Security to my office. We have a trespasser to remove. She turned and walked out, not waiting for the guards, her back as straight and unyielding as it had been in the trauma bay. Hours passed. By noon, the city had moved on. Alistair Finch was enjoying a celebratory lunch with two board members, regaling them with a sanitized version of his firm but fair handling of a problematic employee. Elara Vance was in a small anonymous coffee shop miles away, nursing a black coffee and staring out the window, contemplating what came next. And at Metropolitan General, all hell was breaking loose. It began not with a bang, but with a quiet, systematic takeover. A white panel van, the kind used by plumbers or electricians, had pulled into the hospital's loading dock. 5 men in matching gray coveralls emerged. They moved with the synchronized, purposeful gait of a professional military unit. They were not thieves. They were hunters. Their target was Sheikh Al-Hamad, a politically sensitive foreign dignitary who had been secretly admitted under a pseudonym for a complex cardiac procedure. He was now recovering in the VIP suite on the 5th floor. The men neutralized the 2 security guards at the loading dock with silenced pistols, the quiet foot of the weapons lost in the rumble of a passing delivery truck. Within minutes, they had sliced through the hospital's servers, seizing control of the security cameras, communications, and electronic door locks. They were led by a man known only by his call sign, Rhino. He was a bull of a man, with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a tree trunk. His face a roadmap of old scars. He was a professional, cold and ruthlessly efficient. He established a command post in Finch's now empty office, his tech expert patching their encrypted network into the hospital's infrastructure. The hospital was now a cage, and they held the key. The lockdown was absolute. Doors sealed shut. Phone lines went dead. Panic began to ripple through the staff and patients as they realized they were trapped. Rhino's men, now clad in black tactical gear and carrying short-barreled rifles, began a systematic sweep of the 5th floor, their objective clear. One of the hospital's security guards, a former Marine corporal named David Chen, tried to be a hero. He saw 2 of the armed men advancing down a hallway and drew his sidearm, taking cover behind a nurse's station. He got one shot off, the loud crack of his pistol echoing in the suddenly silent corridor, the round sparking harmlessly off the mercenary's body armor. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. A burst of automatic fire shredded the flimsy particle board of the nurse's station, and Chen went down, a cry of pain torn from his lips, as rounds tore through his leg. Elara had been in the multi-level parking garage beneath the hospital, about to get into her modest sedan, when the lockdown was triggered. The heavy steel gates had slammed down with a deafening clang, sealing the exits. Her phone had no signal. Her first instinct was professional curiosity, then a growing sense of unease. She made her way to the security booth near the vehicle entrance. The guard was gone, likely responding to an alert upstairs. On the monitor, a series of camera feeds played out a nightmare. She saw armed men in tactical gear. She saw panicked staff running for cover. She saw David Chen fall in a hail of gunfire. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. It was a change as definite and as total as a switch being thrown. The weary resignation in her eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness. The soft posture of the nurse straightened into the rigid, alert stance of a soldier. The quiet professional who had been unjustly fired was gone. Erased. In her place stood Valkyrie. Her mind, no longer occupied with dosages and diagnoses, became a tactical map. She assessed the enemy's numbers from the camera feeds. 5, maybe 6. professional gear, coordinated movements. This was not a random act of violence. This was an operation. Her gaze fell on the monitor showing David Chen bleeding on the floor. He was alive, but not for long if that femoral bleed wasn't stopped. She had a new objective. She moved from the parking garage into the hospital's sprawling sub-basement, a labyrinth of steam pipes, electrical conduits, and maintenance tunnels she had taken the time to learn during her first few weeks on the job. She was a ghost in the machine, moving through the hospital's unseen arteries. The air was cool and smelled of dust and ozone. She moved in complete silence, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the concrete floor. She found a service elevator and ascended, emerging in a linen closet on the first floor, just one level below where Chen had fallen. She found him behind the shot-up nurse's station. He was pale and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes, clouded with pain, widened in recognition when he saw her. "Vance? What?" he gasped. "Don't talk," she commanded, her voice low and steady. Her hands were already at work, her trauma shears slicing through his uniform pants. The wound was bad, a messy exit from a high-velocity round that had shattered his femur. Arterial blood pulsed in a sickening rhythm. She pulled a spare set of scrubs from a nearby cart, tearing a long strip and fashioning a makeshift tourniquet, applying it with the same brutal efficiency she had shown in the ER. She found his sidearm, a Beretta M9, lying on the floor beside him. She checked the magazine and chamber, her movements economical and sure. "I'm getting you out of here," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But first, I'm going to finish this." In his office-turned-command post, Rhino watched the camera feeds with growing impatience. His men were closing in on the dignitary's room, but the resistance from the guard, however brief, had been an unwelcome complication. "Sweep and clear," he ordered into his throat mic. "Standard protocol. 2-man teams. I want that floor sanitized." Two of his men, call signs Ghost and Spectre, began moving down the corridor where Chen had fallen. They were confident, almost arrogant in their movements, rifles held at a low ready. They passed a large supply closet, its door slightly ajar. Elara was inside, pressed into the darkness, the cold steel of Chen's pistol, a familiar weight in her hand. She heard their footsteps, the soft scuff of their boots, the jingle of their gear. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate until she could feel each individual beat. As they passed, she exploded from the doorway. She moved not like a nurse, but like a blur of contained violence. Her first target was Ghost, the man in the rear. She slammed the heavy closet door into his side, knocking him off balance and into the wall. Before he could recover, she drove the heel of her hand up under his chin, the whiplash effect snapping his head back against the concrete with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Spectre spun around, his rifle coming up, but he was too slow. Elara was already on him. She grabbed the barrel of his weapon with her left hand, deflecting it towards the ceiling as he reflexively squeezed the trigger, a muffled burst of 3 rounds punching into the acoustic tiles above. Simultaneously, she fired the Beretta once. The shot was perfectly placed, the 9mm round entering through the softer armor under his armpit, piercing his lung. He gasped, a look of utter shock on his face, and slid down the wall, leaving a crimson smear. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds. It was silent, brutal, and lethally efficient. She quickly stripped Spectre of his rifle, a compact MP7 submachine gun, 3 spare magazines, his body armor, and his radio headset. She put the headset on, listening to the panicked chatter on the other end, as Rhino demanded a situation report. She remained silent, melting back into the shadows of the service corridors. Rhino stared at the 2 red icons on his tactical display, indicating his men were down. "Ghost? Spectre? Report," he barked into his mic. The only reply was static. He rewound the security footage from the hallway camera. The quality was grainy, the angle poor, but what he saw made the hairs on his thick neck stand up. He saw a shape, a woman in scrubs, emerge from the darkness. He saw a blur of motion. He saw 2 of his highly trained, combat-hardened mercenaries go down as if they had been struck by lightning. "Who the hell is that?" he snarled to his tech expert. The tech frantically typed on his keyboard, trying to pull up a hospital staff manifest. In the corner of the office, Alistair Finch, who had been brought in to be used as a bargaining chip, watched the screen. His face, already pale with fear, turned ashen. He recognized the figure. The quiet nurse. The insubordinate woman he had fired that very morning, a choked, incredulous sound escaped his lips. That can't be. Outside the hospital, the situation had escalated into a full-blown federal incident. The local police had established a perimeter, but they were being waved off by grim-faced FBI agents in tactical gear. A mobile command center had been set up, but the man in charge wasn't an FBI section chief. Just as the hostage rescue team was preparing to breach, a convoy of black Chevrolet Suburbans, flanked by 2 military police Humvees, screamed to a halt at the edge of the police line. The doors flew open, and out stepped a man who radiated an aura of absolute command. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face a craggy landscape of authority. His dark blue dress uniform, adorned with the 4 silver stars of a full general. This was General Marcus Thorne, a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Thorne strode into the FBI command center, and the frantic energy in the tent immediately ceased. Agents and commanders snapped to attention. Thorne ignored them, his eyes fixed on the lead FBI negotiator. "Get me a line to the man in charge inside." "Now," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that promised dire consequences for any delay. A moment later, a channel was opened. Thorne also had his aide patch him directly into the hospital's public address system. His voice, amplified and digitally clear, suddenly boomed through every speaker in the besieged building. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This is General Marcus Thorne of the United States Army. To the individuals who have seized control of Metropolitan General Hospital, you have made a catastrophic error in judgment." In the administrator's office, Rhino and his remaining men froze, listening. Alistair Finch whimpered in his corner. "You believe you are in a civilian facility. You are mistaken," Thorne's voice continued, echoing through the empty, sterile hallways. "You have inadvertently entered the hunting ground of an operative with the call sign Valkyrie. For your own survival, I strongly advise you to lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." On the 5th floor, hidden in a darkened utility room, Elara heard her name, and a flicker of a long-buried past crossed her features. It was a look of pain, of memory, and of profound exhaustion. Rhino laughed, a short, harsh bark. "Valkyrie? What is this? A joke?" he muttered into his own comms. But there was a new seed of uncertainty in his mind. The woman on the tape, the efficiency of the takedown, it wasn't random. General Thorne's voice filled the air again, and this time it was not a warning, but a eulogy and an indictment. "The woman you are attempting to hunt is Major Elara Vance, United States Army Special Operations Command, retired. She is the decorated recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars, and a Purple Heart, with a citation so heavily classified that most of this country's leadership is not cleared to read it." Thorne's voice took on a raw, personal edge, as if he were recounting a sacred story. "You see, 8 years ago, in a forgotten corner of Kandahar province, Major Vance's unit was ambushed. Their position was overrun. The building they were in collapsed by an RPG. Vance was the only one who remained combat effective. For 17 hours, she held off a force of more than 3 dozen insurgents, alone. She did this while simultaneously digging her wounded teammates out of the rubble with her bare hands. The scar on her arm, the one she probably told people was from a climbing accident, is from a piece of white-hot shrapnel that tore through her flesh as she shielded her dying sergeant from a grenade blast. She carried that man, and 2 others, for 2 kilometers through enemy territory to the extraction point. A heavy silence descended upon the hospital, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Every person inside, mercenary, doctor, patient, listened, captivated. Finch stared at the security monitor, at the ghost in blue scrubs, and felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the armed men in the room. It was the dread of a man who has just realized he spat in the face of a god. Thorne's voice dropped to a low, menacing growl. "She left the service to find some measure of peace from the ghosts you can't possibly imagine. She came here to save lives, quietly, anonymously. You fools, you brought her war, and there is no one on this earth more proficient at it." The revelation shattered Rhino's confidence. He was not a fool. He knew the legends, the whispers of operators who were a different breed, ghosts in the system. Valkyrie was one of those legends. He realized with a sickening certainty that he was not the hunter. He was the prey. He grabbed Alistair Finch, yanking him to his feet and pressing the muzzle of his pistol to the administrator's temple. I want a chopper on the roof and safe passage, he yelled, his voice strained. Or the administrator dies. The door to the office, which Rhino had thought was securely locked, swung open. Elara stood there. She was no longer wearing the blood-spattered scrubs. She now wore the black body armor she had taken, and she held the MP7 not like a nurse, but like an extension of her own body. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Let him go, she said, her voice quiet but carrying over Finch's terrified sobs. Rhino sneered, trying to regain control. Or you'll what? Shoot through him to get to me? The final confrontation was not a prolonged firefight. It was a display of brutal physics. Elara took 2 quick steps forward and fired a single round from the MP7. The bullet did not hit Rhino. It struck the heavy brass nameplate on the edge of Finch's desk. The round, traveling at over 900 miles per hour, vaporized a chunk of the metal, sending a spray of hot brass fragments directly into Rhino's face. He screamed, dropping his pistol as he instinctively clawed at his eyes, temporarily blinded. In that split second, Elara closed the distance. She struck him once in the throat with the butt of her weapon, collapsing his windpipe. As he staggered back, gasping, she swept his legs out from under him, and a sharp, downward stomp resulted in the sickening, audible snap of his forearm. It was over. The remaining mercenaries, having heard everything over the comms and seeing their leader writhing on the floor, offered no resistance when she disarmed them. They surrendered with a look of terrified relief. Alistair Finch, now free, scrambled away from her, a blubbering, pathetic mess. Major Vance! Major Vance, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Please, you have to understand. She did not even grant him a glance. Her gaze swept over him as if he were a piece of furniture, and she walked past, leaving him to his ruin. Moments later, General Thorne's entry team, composed of elite military police, stormed the office. They cuffed the mercenaries and helped the blinded Rhino to his feet. One of the soldiers, a captain, walked over to Finch and handed him a sealed manila envelope. From the Department of Defense, sir, the captain said with undisguised contempt. Finch tore it open with trembling hands. It was a formal notice. Due to a catastrophic failure of personnel management and a severe breach of security protocols involving a person of national strategic importance, all federal contracts and grants with Metropolitan General Hospital, a sum totaling in the hundreds of millions of dollars, were immediately and indefinitely suspended pending a full investigation. In a single moment, Finch saw his career, his reputation, and his entire world evaporate. As heavily armed soldiers secured the building, Elara made her way back down to the emergency room. Word had spread like wildfire. The staff, who had been huddled in locked rooms and behind barricades, were now emerging, their faces a mixture of fear, relief, and utter astonishment. They saw her walking through the same hallways where, just that morning, she had been a quiet, unassuming nurse. Now she was clad in black body armor, a submachine gun held loosely in one hand, her face streaked with grime. They stared at her, not as a colleague, but as something else entirely. A myth made flesh. The gruff trauma surgeon who had so often been short with her, a man named Dr. Evans, was the first to react. He looked at her, at the quiet warrior who had saved them all, and he began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound in the cavernous room. Then a resident joined in, then another nurse, and another. Within seconds, the entire emergency room, filled with the very people who had underestimated or ignored her, erupted in a thunderous, rolling wave of applause. It was not just for her actions that day. It was an apology, an acknowledgement, a tribute to the silent giant who had walked among them, unseen. Elara did not smile. She did not acknowledge the ovation. She simply continued her steady walk toward the main entrance. Her expression, one of deep, soul-crushing weariness. The fight was over, and now the ghosts were returning. General Thorne was waiting for her just inside the shattered glass doors of the ambulance bay. The setting sun cast long shadows glinting off the 4 stars on his shoulders. He looked at her, and his hard general's face softened with a profound, almost paternal respect and sorrow. "It's good to see you, Major," he said, his voice quiet now. She stopped in front of him and gave a slow, tired nod. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind only the bone-deep ache of a life she had tried so desperately to leave behind. "I need a quiet place, Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Just a quiet place. He understood completely. Without a word, he removed his own formal dress uniform jacket, the heavy blue wool covered in ribbons and insignia, and gently draped it over her shoulders, covering the tactical vest and the bloodstains. It was an act of profound respect, a shield to protect her from the prying eyes of the world. "I've got one for you, Elara," he assured her. "As quiet as you need." He placed a steadying hand on her back and personally escorted her past the news crews and the flashing lights of police cars toward one of the waiting black Suburbans. She climbed in without a backward glance at the hospital, at the life she had briefly built, or at the man whose arrogance had shattered it. The door closed with a solid thud, and the vehicle pulled away, disappearing into the evening traffic. Back in the wreckage of his opulent office, Alistair Finch sat amidst the debris of his life, the termination letter from the DoD clutched in his hand. He was a monument to the profound folly of judging strength by its volume, or heroism by its visibility. The story of what happened that day at Metropolitan General became a quiet legend, a whispered cautionary tale passed down from one generation of medical residents to the next. It was a story about the unassuming nurse who was more than she seemed, a reminder that the person changing bedpans or taking your blood pressure might once have been a king, or a queen, or a warrior who had held the fate of nations in their steady, scarred hands. They were the hidden wolves, the quiet giants who walked among us, their heroism earned in crucibles we could never imagine, their peace a fragile treasure we should never disturb. For sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one you never even noticed was there.